Tonight on Free Minds TV, we talk about journalists being arrested on Capitol Hill. We'll also be discussing a bill to drug test lawmakers as well as welfare recipients, plus virtual pat-downs in New York City, plus a whole lot more coming up tonight on Free Minds TV.
You have tuned into episode 240 of Free Minds TV, where we challenge you, the viewer, to think outside the box. With you, as always, is Toby.
And Nick.
And
well,
Nick's back.
As always, most of the time.
Yeah, well, I'm glad that you're all right and not in a car accident or some horrible illness that's killing you or something.
I was asleep.
Because there was, if anyone missed it, I was alone last week, and I actually managed to do a whole show. It might not have been completely coherent or full of sense, but the 29 minutes was all there to release a new episode. So this week, hopefully, we'll have something that not only has my mad rantings, but Nick can make sense of the things that I say as well. Because that's
part of the show, too.
It creates a little bit better format than me just saying the craziness. Like not being able to pronounce the names of places in the world or even know where on the globe they are.
That is always a weak point of yours.
And
Place names are not a strong point for you.
It was an African country last week. It started with an E. I don't remember what it was.
Ethiopia? Eritrea?
No. That was the one.
Yeah, there you go.
Least free country for journalists in the whole world.
Well, we better not do the show there.
Anyways, we do have an update on that story we were talking about journalism and the U.S. as well as many places in the world not doing so well. We'll be getting into that later in the show, as well as the virtual pat-downs and an update on that story we were talking about drug testing lawmakers as well as welfare recipients. Some lawmakers don't really like that, wonder why, but we'll be getting an update there. But first, I want to talk about something particularly disturbing about what the U.S. foreign policy is up to these days, Nick. We know it's not happy, but our commander-in-chief, the guy who won a Nobel Peace Prize, is out there in the Middle East. Well, I guess people aren't there. It's these drones that seem to be the issue nowadays, unmanned drones who go in there and do the work that soldiers used to have to do the horrible, bloody work of slaughtering people. Now we can just have drones do it, right? It's much happier if it's video game style. Actually, studies have shown that it's much more traumatizing to the people who have to press the buttons. But anyways, it makes the U.S. feel better, right? Because our people aren't in harm's way. It's just the people on the other side that get shot up and killed. Well, why do we care? They're terrorists, right? Well, not always. This is coming from Salon.com, but the reason I took this blog source, it's someone connecting a whole bunch of other news reports from different news agencies like the New York Times, CNN, the Associated Press, ABC News, Al Jazeera. He kind of is connecting lots of different news stories together. So that's why I took the one from Salon.com. I'll post the show notes up on freemindstv.com under this week's show notes. So if you want to go and actually view every single different news story from all the different news outlets you can for this story. But what am I talking about? Let's get into this. On December 30 of last year, ABC News reported that a 16-year-old Pakistani boy, Tariq Khan, who was killed with his 12-year-old cousin, when a car in which he was riding in was hit by a missile fired by a U.S. drone. The report contained this extraordinary passage buried in the middle of the article. Quote, drones often target people who show up at the scene of an attack. What's that mean? Well, that means that the U.S. first kills the people with drones and then fires on the rescuers and others who arrive at the scene where the new corpses and injured victims lies. In a just-released, richly documented report, the Bureau of Investigative Journalism, on behalf of the Sunday Times, documents that this is exactly what the U.S. is doing, and worse. The CIA's drone campaign in Pakistan has killed dozens of civilians who had gone to help rescue victims or were attending funerals. An investigation by the Bureau for the Sunday Times has revealed. The findings are published just days after President Obama, you know, the guy who won a Peace Prize for being so peaceful, claimed that the drone campaign in Pakistan was, quote, target-focused effort, and that has not caused a huge number of civilian casualties. A 3-month investigation, including eyewitness reports, has found evidence that at least 50 civilians were killed in follow-up strikes when they had gone to help victims. More than 20 civilians had also been killed in attacks in deliberate strikes on funerals and mourners. Although the drone attacks were started by the Bush administration in 2004, they have been stepped up by Obama. There have been 260 attacks by unmanned predators and reapers in Pakistan by the Obama administration, averaging about 4 a day. At least 15 attacks were on rescuers, and dozens more were at funerals. There was one other thing I wanted to point out here, one other quote before I let Nick make some sense of all this. As the report notes, it's particularly remarkable that these findings come on the heels of President Obama's recent boasting about the efficacy of drones and the specific claim that the policy has not caused a huge number of civilian casualties, adding that it was important for everybody to understand that this thing is kept on a very tight leash. Compare that to the Bureau's claim that almost certainly understates the conclusion that it has, quote, found that since Obama took office 3 years ago, between 282 and 535 civilians have been credibly reported as killed, including more than 60 children. And this includes the targeting of rescuers and funeral attendees.
Yeah, I mean...
I didn't know that this was going on like this, Nick. You told me when we were talking in the beginning. Well, that's what you do. It's war, right?
Well, I wasn't suggesting that we should be doing this, but it's not a terribly uncommon practice. If you look, typically war is about killing people.
Do the American people know that that's what their tax dollars are doing, is in Pakistan killing women and children and rescuers who go
I think there's
responders?
I think there is a disconnect between what people perceive to be the reality and what actually takes place. And I think when you read reporting like this, which seems credible to me because we've reported on drone strikes that have supposedly killed 50, 60, 70 people when they target weddings, funerals, etc. And it's clear that while there may be legitimate targets, a reason why they're carrying out the strike, they're certainly not concerned with carrying it out with surgical precision by any means. If you're willing to kill 40 or 50 women and kids and non-combatants to kill 5 or 10 terrorists, then clearly, what you're saying there with that policy is it's acceptable to kill innocents if we think the prize that we get at the end, that is killing enemy combatants, is worth it.
And not only the innocent people, Nick, also in this report here, thanks to WikiLeaks, has shown a video of an Apache helicopter shooting on reporters, Reuters journalists, and then fired at the responders who came to help rescue people and treat the wounded. So it's not only, it's also reporters, women, children, rescuers. Anything goes, I guess.
Right. Well, I mean, there's this...
And we're not even at war with Pakistan.
Right. Well, no, we're not. There is no
supposedly, it seems like a war to me.
There's no declaration of war. There's no declaration of, there's been no congressional issuance of letters of reprisal, which is a license to kill, for those who don't know, more or less.
A letter of reprisal is a license to kill. And who grants this license?
The Congress would.
Oh, okay.
But they haven't even granted that license, and typically they would name, in the past it was used, letters of marque and reprisal were typically used for addressing issues of piracy or attacking vessels that were flagged by another country. But yeah, I mean, clearly, I guess the case I could see being made is that the assumption that they're making is that people responding to a drone strike on militants, on terrorists, there's a reasonable chance to believe that it's terrorists who are responding. It's reasonable to think that that's a possibility. It's also, to me, seems likely that if you just carry out a drone strike, in the middle of nowhere, Pakistan, whoever's nearby and can actually witness that taking place might go and try to help, whether they're affiliated with terrorist organizations or not. A tribal Pakistani is not necessarily going to know the difference between a militant terrorist and somebody who just got caught in a drone strike. And I'm sure that innocent people are being killed in the drone strikes, Toby, which I think lends some credence to the idea of blowback, which has been discussed. Ron Paul really made it popular. But this idea that by carrying out drone strikes in places like Pakistan, yes, we might be killing terrorists with some of them. However, you are killing innocent people as well, and that creates a lot of resentment, especially in a culture like you've got in Afghanistan and Pakistan, where there's a pretty heavy emphasis placed on the need for vengeance killings and things like that. So it's, and you could understand if your family members had been killed in a drone strike, whether that drone strike had been targeted towards bad people or not. If your family members or your friends were innocent bystanders in, say, a Pakistani military drone strike, I think you could understand how that might create a bit of animosity and a bit of dislike.
Yeah, I'd say so. Well, I think more people should at least know about this, if not. But I guess they don't. This isn't huge. The reason why I had to tie all these different stories together was because it's not really something the media is focusing on.
No, I mean,
like there's a story here and a story here, but for some reason it's not showing up on the front pages of newspaper, and there's no in-depth reporting on it. I don't really understand why that is.
There's been a pretty tight. I think the war reporting in general and civil liberties issues haven't really been covered as much in the mainstream American press because there's been such a focus on economic issues. And when we're discussing politics or when we're discussing American society, the issue that's on most people's minds are things like the unemployment rate, what the stock market's going to do. I don't think people, and because we have seen combat troops withdrawn from Iraq, and there's this talk about a light at the end of the tunnel in Afghanistan. I think there is genuinely this feeling amongst a lot of people in the U.S. that this period of our history is winding down. Afghanistan's not over yet, but it will be, and this war period will be pretty much over in a couple of years. With the rhetoric we're hearing about Iran right now, Toby, with the drone strikes taking place in Pakistan still, and the animosity that they've created, I'm not that confident that we've seen an end to this at all.
All right. Well, speaking of journalism, Nick, last week I was talking about a story from the Journalists Without Borders that was told a pretty troubling story about reporters all over the globe really fighting crackdowns from their governments on freedom of the press. The U.S. was one of those countries, dropping 29 points to number 47, the 47th country with the freest media. Not all that good when our First Amendment is freedom of the press, but it looks like it continues, Nick.
Yeah, and this story is not an isolated incident. The First Amendment's been, it's been severely curtailed, along with, other provisions in the Bill of Rights like the Fourth Amendment, especially since September 11th, now that there's this, this national security excuse that they can use. The Huffington Post is reporting that they obtained exclusive video of the arrest of Josh Fox, who is the maker of an Academy Award-nominated documentary, Gasland, which focuses on, I guess, I haven't watched it myself, but the controversial practices that are used for extracting natural gas, things like hydraulic fracking and all of that. Representative Brad Miller, a Democrat from North Carolina, the ranking Democrat on the House subcommittee, I believe this was the House subcommittee on Energy and Environment, can be heard in this videotape that HuffPo claims to have obtained, asking the Republican chairman, Andy Harris, a Republican from Maryland, to halt the arrest and permit Fox to film the public hearing. Now, this is why he was being arrested. Simply because he was filming, he did not have official Capitol Hill credentials, but he's a well-known journalist. I mean, he was director of an Academy Award-nominated film, so pretty well known. But because technically he didn't have the right paperwork, he was arrested for attempting to film. And there was a statement here that I think sums it up. This is not typical behavior. Representative Jerry Nadler told the Huffington Post, "I have served in the House of Representatives since 1992, and I had the privilege of chairing the subcommittee on the Constitution, Civil Rights, and Civil Liberties. In all that time, I cannot recall a chair of any committee or subcommittee having ever ordered the removal of a person who is filming a committee proceeding and not being disruptive, whether or not the person was accredited. It is a matter of routine that all sorts of people photograph and record our proceedings. Most of them are not accredited. I cannot recall anyone questioning their right to be there." And the argument that was being made by the guys over at Gasland was that it is supposed, the Congress, Toby, the Capitol building is supposed to be the people's house. It's supposed to be the people's business being carried out. And the point was made that anybody calling themselves a journalist trying to document public proceedings in the legislature is a journalist. Simply by the fact that they declared it. You don't need paperwork from the government to say you have freedom of the press.
What's this press credential I've always heard about? Did you get that somewhere? Can you go to... You get a license?
Yeah, there's paperwork you can fill out.
And who gives you these licenses?
Well, I don't know how it works specifically for Capitol Hill, but typically these press credentials would be granted either by, the Capitol building or by the White House.
So
there's a White House press corps.
Oh.
And so,
I've always heard press credentials.
Right.
I didn't know if I had them or not. I guess no?
No, not unless somebody gives them to you. I mean, these are
Can
credentials.
you give them to me?
No.
Oh.
The people who say you have to ask, the people claiming that you have to ask them for this, in this case, largely it's the government.
Oh.
Yeah. See, I mean, the wire services and some papers and stuff will hand out their own credentials and say in the eyes of the AP or in the eyes of the New York Times, you're a journalist doing reporting for us. But, and these are typically, AP, New York Times, probably going to be pretty well respected. But the fact is...
Not us, though.
No.
Oh.
And... that's not the way it's supposed to work.
Oh.
I mean, if you've got a free press, anybody with access to a press, remember the press used to be an actual printing press where you printed letters on paper, but today it covers a wide range of things, including this show. And this would be considered the press. This is media. That's what they were talking about with freedom of the press. And you did not need permission from the government, to be a journalist, to be somebody who is operating a press. That flies in the face of everything the First Amendment's supposed to be about. So unfortunately, Toby, this is the point where we're at today, where it's acceptable to have people arrested for filming a public hearing without being disruptive. I mean, he wasn't wearing some kind of a funny hat and dancing around, in front of the representatives on the subcommittee. He was just filming what they were saying, and they didn't like it. And that's very troubling to me.
Well,
that we would be at that point.
I must say, Nick, it doesn't surprise me.
No, it doesn't surprise me either, but it's troubling to me that we've gotten there.
Well, I guess I see the logic behind it. You don't want a whole bunch of crazy independent media people making the news. You want to make sure that it's a few collected, large,
exactly. You want the
corporate run.
Right. The people who want to remain in your good graces so that they can keep their press badges, they're the people who make it into the White House press corps, not you and I or normal people.
Makes sense.
Even.
If I was the president, Nick, I wouldn't want me in the U.S. press corps. If that's is that who gets to decide the president? I wasn't listening.
There's probably the press secretary who decides that.
Speaking of the First Amendment going away, it looks like more attacks on that Fourth Amendment, the least popular of the amendments as far as I'm concerned. Well, maybe the 10th Amendment. None of them are all that important. The Fourth Amendment is one that, well...
not all that important in the eyes of the government anymore.
Right.
Would be the...
Well, we're talking about that's who makes the rules, right? The government makes the rules, and they've said the First Amendment, well, we're not really liking that one. Let's start chipping away at that one. The Fourth Amendment, well, we haven't liked that one for a very long time. 10th Amendment was even before that. But Fourth Amendment, sometimes people still pay lip service to this silly thing. So the government's got to step up their fight against that. And this is coming from New York with CBS News reporting. The NYPD feds testing gun scanning technology, but civil liberty groups are a little bit upset about it. We have been predicting that, those TSA scanners in airports that you walk through and it takes a picture of you and sees through your clothes to see if you have any weapons or explosive devices on you or anything metal. We've been saying that those are going to be showing up in big cities at bus stops and train stations. I think we might have been wrong, Nick. They've got a new technology that's even cooler that will do away with all those things. In New York, the NYPD is stepping up their war against illegal guns with a new tool that could detect weapons on someone as they walk down the street. They don't even need to go through a little device or a little booth or anything to scan. It just scans them as they walk. Police, along with the U.S. Department of Defense, are researching new technology in a scanner placed on police vehicles that can detect concealed weapons. You could use it at a specific event. You could use it at a shooting-prone location, NYPD Commissioner Ray Kelly told CBS 2's Hazel Sanchez on Tuesday. It's called a terahertz imaging detection. Terahertz imaging detection. It measures the energy radiating from the body up to 16 feet away and can detect anything blocking it like a gun. Here's some quotes from people on the street. I think it's good. people will be safer, and it will be a safer environment. If it's going to make us safer as citizens, I'm okay with it. It's definitely a privacy issue, but it's for our safety. Wow, these people, they like it, Nick. I guess maybe we should have them if everybody likes it so much. The New York Civil Liberties Union doesn't like it as much. They have some quotes saying we don't like that. But then at the end of the article, there's more quotes of people saying they do like it. I think that's good. I think so, if someone has something to hide, they're not going to worry about if someone doesn't have something to hide, they're not going to worry about it. Who cares?
Well, the problem in this case is the thing you have to hide is something that you have a natural right to have.
No, you don't. Not in New York, Nick.
Well,
you can't have guns under your pants.
Right. I mean, that's the issue here is that the government of the city of New York and the state of New York have decided that
the rights of the Second Amendment
have decided that they need to disarm people. And you need to remember, I mean, the government can't be everywhere all the time. The police forces can't be everywhere all the time. And frankly, a lot of people carrying illegal guns in New York City, some of them are otherwise law-abiding people. They're not necessarily gang members. If you want to defend yourself in a place like New York City, LA, DC, quite often because of the paperwork that's in place, for the average person, it's simply more practical to simply flaunt the law and carry an unregistered firearm or carry a firearm when you don't have a concealed permit. And frankly, I don't see anything wrong with that. I think the issue you need to address here are people shooting each other in the streets. They don't have a good reason to, like defending themselves, like gang members do. Not prior restraint where you disarm everybody. And the other reason that for firearms ownership, Toby, and it's not a particularly popular one to say, but I don't mind saying it, is not only protecting yourself from criminals, but it's also protecting yourself from the government.
Why would you want to protect yourself from the government, Nick? These are the people trying to keep you safe.
Yeah. I mean, governments are actually, I forget what institution did this study. I think it might have been University of Hawaii, but I think that's wrong too. But they did a study on democide, which is the term that they apply for governments killing civilians that are supposed to be under their protection, rather than hostile, basically foreign nationals in an act of war. And during the 20th century, Toby, which there were plenty of military deaths in, we had World War I, World War II, a whole host of very nasty wars with high body counts. They found that 4 times as many people were killed by their own governments. The Jews in Nazi-occupied Europe, about 25 million people in the Soviet Union, about maybe 60 million in Maoist China were killed by their own government. You're actually far more likely to be killed by your own government, if the 20th century was anything to go by, than 4 times more likely, according to the study, and the way they did their numbers, and I thought it was pretty well done, than you are to be killed by a foreign government trying to kill you. So it's actually, statistically speaking, I mean, you have to keep specifics in mind, but statistically speaking, Toby, I'm more likely to be killed by our government here in the U.S. than I am by somebody overseas trying to kill me. At least based on the historical record, over a long enough period of time, it's more likely that your own government's going to kill a whole bunch of your nationals.
That's just because, what was it, Maoist government? I've never heard of this Maoist killing of 60 million people. They're probably skewing those numbers. That's an outlier. That's bringing the media in.
Well, they didn't do it with bullets. They actually starved, some tens of millions to death intentionally. Does that count?
Sure.
Or was that a food shortage that killed them?
Who knows?
But I mean, unfortunately, genocide's a pretty commonplace occurrence. I mean, you can look at Rwanda, Darfur, Cambodia.
But the U.S. is better than that, Nick.
Nicaragua, we had some civil war where there were genocides. I mean, if I took some time, I could probably name for you 20 or 30 genocides that took place in the last century. So, I mean, people think of the
going on right now.
Right. People think of the Holocaust, but it's really, unfortunately, when people say never again, it's already happened again and again.
And is currently happening right now.
And is currently happening right now. In fact, genocide and governments killing their own citizens on planet Earth is pretty much a fact. I mean, it's just part of the human condition. A lot of you don't realize that, and it's not a very good feeling when you do come to that realization, but if you look at history, that's pretty much always been the case.
Anyways, Nick, getting back to this story before we move on, I have a prediction. And this prediction is this. Right now they're saying that they're only going to be using this place in targeted areas for these virtual pat-downs, essentially. My prediction is this. Eventually, say 10, 20 years down the line, all the cameras, all those tens of thousands of cameras that they have up in cities, and more going up every single day, will have this technology to be able to scan through clothes and pick up guns, or they also say that they're going to be able to pick up explosive devices. Really, it's anything that's blocks body heat. So neat technology, pretty much taking away any ability to conceal anything. And I guess if you don't have anything to hide, Nick, what's your problem?
Yeah, I still think there's an expectation of privacy in a public place. We were having this discussion. There's a big difference between videotaping somebody and looking under their clothes. I think the whole reason I wear clothes is because I have a reasonable expectation that when I go out in public, you're not going to be able to see what's underneath them. So to me, scanning through somebody's clothes is clearly a search in the same way that a pat-down would be. And doing it without any cause whatsoever in a blanket way is just completely anathema to constitutional law.
And all those people who are like all the quotes in this article, tons of them saying, well, if you don't have anything to hide, if it makes us safer, well, then what's the point in the Fourth Amendment? If you're going to say that quote, can you be honest and say, let's throw away the whole thing while you're at it?
That's how many people feel, unfortunately.
Well, be honest. Say it then. I hate this paying lip service. Well, there's quotes in here. Well, the Fourth Amendment is very important, but so is the safety of the people. No, you don't like the Fourth Amendment. Just say it. Be honest at least. Be an honest dictator. I'll respect you more. All right, let's get an update on this welfare bill. They want to drug test welfare recipients, and some people say, well, you government legislators, you're getting a government paycheck. You're kind of like a welfare recipient who comes and passes laws, right?
Exactly, and that was a justification down in Florida in the State House that Representative Ryan, I might butcher the name here, I believe it's Dvorak, a Democrat. He introduced an amendment to a bill to drug test welfare recipients. And here's a quote here. There was an amendment offered today that required drug testing for legislators as well, and it passed, which led me to then withdraw the bill, said Representative Judd McMillan, a Republican who had introduced the legislation to drug test welfare recipients. I've only withdrawn it temporarily, stressing that, is what he said, stressing that he carefully crafted his original bill so it could survive a legal challenge. To me, it makes a lot more sense. The actions that legislators take every day, Toby, seem to affect our lives a great deal more than what your typical welfare recipient might, do in his day. I mean, they're receiving government money, but not very much. And even if they're, frittering it away, that's a lot better than, as a drug user, passing laws when you're not in the right frame of mind. And I wouldn't be surprised to know that, to come to the realization that a lot of the legislators in Florida actually use drugs.
Have you ever looked at some of the statistics about lawmakers and DWIs or drug arrests and
politicians
stuff?
They're probably some of the,
some of the worst abusers of narcotics
the worst cheaters that there are, some of the biggest drunks, some of the biggest drug users, and it's just true. I mean, that's just, spend any time around any kind of a political setting, and that's just the way it is.
We're out of time. freemindstv.com in the meantime. Have a great night.